HBCU Week. I'm Tetiana Anderson at Morgan State University with President David Wilson. Dr. Wilson, thank you for being here.
Tetiana, thank you very much for having me.
So it's day one for freshmen. What's the energy like on campus?
The energy is just amazing, if you will. I have just finished serving breakfast on the mall to freshmen and returning students. It's a tradition that we started here at Morgan about 6 or 7 years ago. And I do it particularly for that purpose, and that is to make sure that I'm in conformity with the energy that I see on campus and how the students, sometimes freshmen, entering students, are coming with just a bit of trepidation. They are just not sure. They're making this transition from high school to college, and it's good for me to kind of be in a position where I can receive that and I can understand some of the hesitancy that they have. And so this morning, I was just amazed, to see the thousands of students traverse the campus, and the energy was off the chart.
You mentioned the word tradition, and I'm wondering how important the tradition and the legacy of the whole HBCU system really is to the whole nation, not just here in Maryland and at Morgan State.
HBCUs have a strong legacy of rites, RITES, rituals, and ceremonies. And those rites, rituals, and ceremonies are laced to the historical path and significance of the institutions. And so we here at Morgan, we certainly appreciate that. We put in front of our students, our university community on an ongoing basis, many of those kinds of events that actually is going to uphold the great history of the institution, is going to tell the story of the founding of the institution, is going to always kind of put before students what we think they really need to know, that this institution just didn't all of a sudden appear yesterday, and HBCUs across the country didn't just appear yesterday. I mean, this genre of institutions, many of them are well over 150 years old, and we have a compelling story to tell. And it's very important that we tell that story in as many different facets as we can.
And when it comes to stories, I definitely want to ask about yours. You are from Alabama. That is home to Tuskegee University. You were raised during the civil rights era. How did your upbringing inform who you are today and what you're doing today?
Well, you can never really run away from your past. And certainly in my case, I have taken my past with me as I have climbed on. And so growing up there in Alabama, of course, there were laws in place that did not require black children to go to school. And so I did not go to school with any degree of regularity until I was in the 7th grade. And of course, that had, unintended consequences, in that I was not really exposed to formal education on an ongoing basis until 7th grade. And so I carry a little bit of what it means to be shut out of a formal educational system with me. Also, I was a young boy when Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. I was in the 6th grade, and I can recall that day as if it were yesterday, because all of a sudden the principal got on the bullhorn, if you will, and announced that Dr. King had been assassinated, and everybody in the school just started yelling and screaming and crying. And I began to understand that, wow, Dr. Martin Luther King, I'd heard a lot about him. I'd never had an opportunity, of course, to come close to meeting him. But I realized at that point that something real precious had been taken from us. And so then as I went on to undergrad at Tuskegee, I was taught by some of the most amazing professors in the country, and basically came away there understanding all too well African history, African American history. I began to understand what I had grown up living in Alabama, but I was understanding it now on a highly intellectual foundation. I mean, the students here at Morgan in the late 50s, early 60s, they too were living their version of hell. They could not go across the street and shop in the shopping centers over there. And they went over there and they sat in and they sat in and they sat in. And they refused to leave until those shops actually served them. Over 400 of them went to jail. And so those students on HBCU campuses, be it Morgan or Tuskegee or you name it, they, in the vernacular, they understood what time of day it was. And they understood their role in making sure that they were speaking to the moment. And having grown up in Alabama, I kind of experienced the same thing on the Tuskegee campus, where we were there with a purpose. Yes, you're going to make sure you get a solid education, but in the process of doing that, you're going to understand what it means to be committed to a cause. And when you go out there, you have to continue to fight for that cause. And so as president of Morgan, I fight for the cause. And that cause is 10 billion times greater than little David Wilson. It is a cause that is still rooted in injustice, is still rooted in inequality. And that is really what drives me, because I understand all too well what it means when those things are shut off from you. What really, really drives me here at Morgan is the fact that I don't want any of those things shut off from my students, the way they were shut off from David Wilson. And that is a part of how I lead, and it will forever be a part of how I lead.
Welcome back. I'm here at Morgan State University with President David Wilson. Your tenure here at Morgan has been coined the Morgan Modern Era. Speak to me a little bit about what that mission means to you and how you're fulfilling it.
Well, Morgan, of course, when you look at our 57-year history, it is an institution that has defined itself based on eras and primarily through the tenures of its presidents. And so I am in my 14th year here. My predecessor was here for 25 plus years, and during his time, Morgan was rebirthed. I think that era was known as the Morgan Renaissance because the institution needed a lot of care and it needed a lot of vision. And so when I came on board, I inherited an institution that had undergone a renaissance. However, what I did was I stepped back and I said, okay, we appreciate that, but we can't live in the past. And so how do we create a shared vision of transformation? And what does that look like? And so the last 14 years or so have been about a transformation of Morgan. And that transformation is defined in so many ways, but first of all, a physical transformation. And so we have now eclipsed 1 billion, approaching $1.1 billion in either commitments that have been made to build new facilities on the campus and or to renovate existing ones. That transformation manifests itself in new academic degree programs. That transformation has manifested itself in the student enrollment on campus. We have gone from 7,000 or so students when I arrived now to approaching 10,000 students from 50 states and 70 some countries. And then of course in the high quality faculty that we have, nearly 700 faculty here, very diverse, on the cutting edge of scholarship in so many ways. And so this transformation has really been about taking note of where the institution was and then how to grow it in a way where it would be one of the most consequential, if not the most consequential university in Maryland and one of the most consequential universities in the United States.
So you talked about several things. I'm going to double back to some of them. But one of them is the transformation that's happened on campus. I mean, if you walk around Morgan State, you see all these beautiful new buildings, structures, greens, and you have stated that you really believe in what you call the transparency of process. So I'm wondering, you've done so much already, but what more is to come? What's in your head? What have you got planned?
Actually, this is just the beginning. And so we want to, of course, continue that transformation in many of the same ways. We want to make sure, that we have a new engineering building here on campus. Morgan is number one in the state of Maryland in producing black engineers. We're number one in civil, number one in electrical, number one in industrial. And we are marching toward making the case for perhaps a new engineering complex on campus because we think we can double the production of engineers. Likewise, a new science complex on campus as well, because we are one of the leading institutions in Maryland in the production of blacks in science. And our facilities are not where they should be. We also want to continue to elevate our research mission here at Morgan. And so we have gone from a moderate research university, which Carnegie classifies as a R3, moderate research, to a high research institution, R2. And we thought we would achieve high research by 2021, but we actually achieved that 3 years earlier in 2018. And so now we are on a path to achieve R1 status, which is very high research. Now, for those who are listening who might not have an understanding of R3, R2, or R1, R1 really means that that's the place where your most elite research institutions rest. It's about 140 plus institutions there. The Ivy League, Big Ten, University of Chicago, but there's no HBCU R1. And our desire is to be one of the first to get there.
I am a product of an HBCU myself. I went to Fisk University, and you talked about the confidence that going to an HBCU instills into its students. For somebody who might not understand, describe what that means. What do students get when they go to an institution that is sort of them, by them, and for them that they can't get at a predominantly white institution?
I've been thinking about this a little bit differently for several years. And while I went to Tuskegee undergrad, this is the first time that I have had such an elongated experience on an HBCU campus. And as such, as I walked the campus of Morgan and I walked the campuses of some of the other HBCUs, here's what I come away with. Every single day on that campus, as students actually traverse those campuses, they really are in a museum. They are in a museum. I mean, the campus itself is a museum. I'm not talking about a museum as a building on the campus. I mean, the entire campus is, and it is rooted so richly in history that speaks to them every single day, right? There's a story behind the name on the building, on every single building here. And when the students actually become intrigued by that and they commence to research that, that in and of itself builds confidence. It builds a sense of belonging, right? And so when you put that together, just being in an environment where you have incidental learning taking place every single day with the formal education that they're getting, that really instills unparalleled confidence in students. And so when students leave Morgan and they go on to grad school, they go into the world of work, it's very important, for them to stand there toe to toe with anyone and not be challenged by the fact that someone else may not have been exposed a certain way. And our students won't own that. They will not own lack of exposure on the part of others because they are fully confident in themselves. And that's what you get here at Morgan. That's what you get on an HBCU campus. And I would say, because most of my career, other than Morgan, has been spent in very large, research-based, traditionally white institutions, that's one of the major differences that I see between HBCUs and what I call TWIs.
President Wilson, thank you so much for this conversation.
And Tetiana, thank you very much for inviting me into this dialogue.